Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Science Dispatch Podcast, episode 42. I am your host, as always, Cameron English, and I am joined, and this is a rare treat for everybody, by Dr. Josh Bloom, Director of Chemical and Pharmaceutical Sciences at the American Council on Science and Health. Josh is stepping in while Dr. Chuck Dinnerstein is off somewhere sipping Mai Tais on a beach. So we're going to talk about chemistry and pharmaceutical drugs with Josh. Josh, how are you today?
I am well, thank you. It's been a while. Have I been censored in some way or deemed unpopular or inappropriate?
You have. We got some complaints the last time you were on the show, and in order to preserve the integrity of our podcast, we had to let you go just for a little bit. But now you're back, and we're going to give you a chance to redeem yourself.
Well, I got to know if you're serious or not.
All right. Our ridiculous, preposterous banter aside, everybody, we've got two stories to discuss, as we always do. Josh is the author of both of them. First one is called Making Vicodin and Percocet Safer by Reducing the Dose of Tylenol. And in a follow-up, he says, a bit of irony, Johnson & Johnson developing drug to undo liver damage from its own Tylenol. Good stuff as always. Josh, let me read the introduction to your story up top, and then I want you to dive into the details. So,
sure.
You write on April 19th, lost in the discussion of the alleged danger of opioid medications is that most of them also contain acetaminophen, which is the active ingredient in Tylenol. Although the drug is generally seen as benign, it is not. Here is what happened when the FDA cut the maximum acetaminophen dose to 325 milligrams. You may be surprised. Okay, so you're talking about a study here. What did they find?
Well, I was surprised because, they throw in Tylenol with some of these opioids because I think there's some evidence that it enhances its efficacy. I haven't really studied that, and I'm going to. But what was shocking was that we're in this opioid equals Satan mindset now. I see no sign of letting up. But in fact, for some percentage of people, it's the Tylenol that they add to the opioid that actually gets them in trouble. In response to that, the FDA cut the amount per pill from, I think the maximum was about 750 milligrams of acetaminophen Tylenol, which could accompany, let's say, hydrocodone, which would then make up Vicodin. It cut it to 325 back in 2011. And you'd think that would just be precautionary. But now there's a study based on 480 million hospitalizations and then also a large number of acute liver failures. And it shows, at least in my mind, very clearly that cutting the Tylenol out of these supposedly deadly pills made them considerably safer, which is kind of like jaw-dropping. I think most people would be very surprised to hear that.
So before we go into the results of the study, which are very, very important to discuss, talk about why Tylenol was added to these painkillers originally, and then what's the mechanism that makes them safer when you reduce the dose? Just briefly go over that for folks.
Well, I've heard two different theories on why acetaminophen is included. And I think the one that's true, and I have to look this up and probably write another hideous article on Tylenol, but it seems to enhance the pain-killing ability of the narcotic. The other one I hear is to keep people from overdosing on the narcotic, which doesn't make a lot of sense because they're overdosing on the acetaminophen. So it's probably the first. So let's just say there was some legitimate science behind combining the two. And this is something I want to explore in my spare time. So let's say there's a reason to put it in there rather than just some nonsense. Well, apparently there's more reason not to put it in there, or at least to put less in, because the Tylenol is doing considerable damage when you think normally, oh, it's just Tylenol and it's the opiate that is the real danger. Well, both can be dangerous depending on how much you take and the condition of your liver and whether you drink, etc. So it was just, I found it extremely interesting that a relatively small decrease in the Tylenol dose per Vicodin or Percocet showed a substantial decrease in hospitalizations for toxicity and also for acute liver failure, which is nothing to mess around with because acute liver failure is extremely dangerous.
So I believe they found in the study that we're talking about here, it was 11% reduction from the time the FDA reduced the dose. Like that's the divider, right? So before and after that, that's when they saw the reduction. And how many hospitalizations again are we talking about? Because 11% sounds like, big deal, that's not that much. But when you're talking about millions of hospitalizations, it's a significant decrease. So like put those numbers in context for us.
Well, normally I poo-poo an 11% anything because it's usually a statistical blip, but not this time because you're talking about 484 million hospitalizations over about a 10 to 12 year period. And out of that 484 million, 40,000 involved opioid plus acetaminophen toxicity. In other words, that was the reason for hospitalization. And the authors divide this paper into two periods. The first, 2007 till 2010, which was prior to the FDA stepping in and saying you can't use so much Tylenol in these pills. And during that time, hospitalizations, and this is specifically for opioid plus acetaminophen toxicity, climbed by 11%. And during the 8 years following that, 2011 through 2019, there was an 11% decrease in hospitalizations. And that was, of course, that was with no change in the opioid dose, simply the acetaminophen dose. And with this many data points, that's real and it's significant.
Yeah, and crucially, you said this, but I want to emphasize it because it's important, and not very many epidemiological studies have this extra safeguard in place to kind of confirm the results. But this, as you said, these are people who were hospitalized for overdosing on these very specific drugs, right? So that's still not, it's not necessarily causal, but it gives you more confidence that the association is, not only is it statistically significant, but it's a real clinically significant finding. Because with a lot of epidemiology, it's like, people eat 2 ounces of ice cream a week, and then they also have a 22% higher risk of dying as a result of that, right? So that's a really loosey-goosey association. We see that all the time in the headlines, but this is actually a bit stronger than that. Is that correct?
I think it's stronger to the fact where a reasonable person could conclude that this is causal. Because if you look at the graph that I have in the article, you see it cut. You see the hospitalizations increasing. Then you reach 2011, which is basically when manufacturers started voluntarily reducing the dose in the combination pill, and it goes back down again. I can't think of any explanation other than causality that covers what's going on there. So I'll go out on a limb and say this is cause and effect, even though this kind of study can't technically prove it. It's the only thing that makes any sense at all.
I was trying to think as I was reading your story, what else might, because I wanted to play devil's advocate. And the only plausible thing I could think of is like maybe some kind of industrial exposure, like a really high exposure to some kind of a chemical that could cause acute liver failure. But there's nothing like that that people are exposed to. I mean, even in, heavy industries or industries where you're manufacturing chemicals that go into consumer products and so forth, the regulations are so stringent that people in those settings aren't even like they have the highest potential exposure to something that could cause this kind of harm, and they're not even exposed to enough of it anymore to cause something like this. So again, I'm a layman. What do I know? But it sounds reasonable to say that this is probably what's causing this.
Well, the other causes of liver failure are hepatitis B and C. There's now a vaccine for B and a cure for C, and of course, alcohol consumption. Especially with Tylenol, that's particularly bad. So they set up the two groups so that the alcohol consumption and liver disease were equal in the two groups, and those are really the only variables in my mind that really make any difference. It's not chemicals that doing this. I mean, this is a well-known toxic effect of acetaminophen, well studied, and there's no question in my mind that this is real and causal. I should also point out that I find it even more surprising because um, the maximum amount of acetaminophen in these combination pills, Vicodin and Percocet, was about 750 milligrams prior to 2011. But typically, you didn't see 700 milligrams. You saw on the bottle it would say something like Vicodin 10 500, which means 10 milligrams of Vicodin and 500 of acetaminophen. So that was the typical high dose for acetaminophen. So now it's 10 325 or 5 325. And that's not a huge decrease. I mean, we're talking about 175 milligrams of acetaminophen per pill. And keep in mind that extra strength Tylenol, which used to be 650, is now 500. So, we're not looking at an extreme cut in the maximum acetaminophen in Vicodin and Percocet. It's a rather small cut with a real effect. So one can only imagine that if it was cut further or the original doses were higher, there would almost certainly be a bigger effect. So between those two facts, uh, I'd have to conclude that acetaminophen was a major contributor to the toxicity of Vicodin and Percocet, which is something most people would not assume to be true.
This may be a silly question, but I could imagine someone suggesting, maybe like the folks at Prop, which you point a shotgun at in the story. I could imagine them saying, well, opioid prescribing just went down a lot in the last decade or so, Dr. Bloom. So maybe that's why there's fewer hospitalizations. Could that be an explanation?
It could be a wrong explanation.
All right, explain the fallacy so people understand.
Okay, the fallacy is obvious. Yes, opioid prescriptions were going down. So what is happening? They're pushing people onto Tylenol. So I don't have the figures in front of me, but there's no question that in hospitalizations, they're giving people Tylenol instead of narcotics in many cases now, including intravenous Tylenol, where you're getting a whole lot of it and it doesn't work. And in post-surgical care, we're talking about painful, really awful pain. They're giving some unfortunate people Tylenol. So there's more Tylenol being prescribed or used since they started cutting back on prescribing the narcotics plus Tylenol. So that absolutely, I can destroy that argument immediately. So that's a bunch of nonsense.
Yeah, thank you for explaining. I'm not sure if anyone has actually said that, but I'm trying to think like a prohibitionist for a second and say, how would I excuse this or dismiss this? And that's the first thing that came to mind is that, well, see, we're so good at getting people not to take these that, there's fewer people being hospitalized for this. But
well, let Andrew Kolodny come up with that argument. I'll take care of that fast.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, standing invitation to anybody we mock on this show. Just saying that out loud makes me realize no one's going to take us up on it. But nonetheless, if you want to come here and state your case, you can even call us corporate shills, which we're not. But in any case, say what you want. It frustrates me. And the reason I say that, Josh, is that, as you've pointed out many times, people are living in excruciating pain to the point that they are either going out on the street to get fentanyl-laced heroin, or they're just shooting themselves because they're living in unbearable pain after some sort of surgery or a really serious car accident, and they get to take Tylenol. It's just, if it weren't so shameful, it would be funny.
Yeah, well, there's nothing funny about it because a woman I've been in contact with for 2 months, and I was thinking of doing an interview with her because she actually had a potential appointment in Switzerland to go for physician-assisted suicide. And it fell through, and somehow, and I don't know the details, I'll find them out, she was able to get some kind of medical help to end her life 2 days ago. And I've talked to her a bunch of times, and now one of the pain advocates just posted rest in peace. Her name is Jess. I won't say any more about that. But, that's deeply upsetting. I spent hours on the phone with this woman, and she had no choices. Zero. Except death.
It's really remarkable. And what's more frustrating about it than anything is that, especially today, there's a lot of talk about harm reduction when it comes to drug use, so there's a lot of, and there's valid science behind it. The idea is that instead of trying to get people just to stop, you step them down or you try to replace the substance they're using with something that's less harmful, hence the name. So it seems that we appreciate the idea of people using drugs in certain contexts if we're working to get them healthier. But when it comes to this issue and a handful of others, there's this Puritan's the wrong word because the Puritans weren't even this puritanical, right? It's like, absolutely not. Drugs are bad, okay? And it doesn't matter if people are trying to fly across the world to commit suicide or if they're living in excruciating pain. It's just, I don't know, Josh.
The zealots are in charge, and they don't care what the patients are going through. All they care about is addiction because they're so-called addiction specialists. And I question whether they're even that. And I think I've mentioned before, without naming names or details, that there's a lot of money behind this. Because in fact, we're not corporate shills because we don't get any money. And my salary reflects that clearly. But actually, the prop members are making a fortune testifying against drug companies. So they're the shills, really. And when one of them dared to call us industry funded, when I questioned her at a debate, I took her apart completely, and I revealed that in one case, she made, I don't know, 50 times what we make a year in corporate donations suing a drug company because of opioids. So these people are just full of that substance.
And moving on to our second story, which I think nicely illustrates why we are not, in fact, corporate chills at ACSH, is your story about how Johnson & Johnson is apparently trying to develop a drug to reverse the liver damage caused by acetaminophen, which is in Tylenol, which they sell boatloads of. so talk about this, Josh. The story is called A Bit of Irony, J&J Developing Drug to Undo Liver Damage from Its Own Tylenol.
You would think this was a Saturday Night Live skit, right?
Oh, that's funny. And by the way, the picture on your article is a little comic clip. It says, "Oh, the irony," and it's somebody using an iron.
I like that one. That was very, I stumbled across that and I was quite pleased. All right. So, first of all, there's nothing wrong with studying a drug which is mostly used to treat conditions where blood platelets get low. That's dangerous. There's nothing wrong with experimenting to see if you can undo liver damage caused by Tylenol. In fact, I would say that it's kind of a noble effort because Johnson & Johnson is opening themselves up to this kind of criticism, although I haven't heard it anyplace else. As I put in the introduction, this is like having a dental office in the back of a candy shop. They're opening themselves up to criticism by trying to cure something that their drug caused in the first place. On the other hand, they're addressing it and they're trying to help it. So I have to give them credit for that. So let's call this one a mixed bag. But in terms of irony, you just can't beat it. I'm speechless. Maybe you have something to say because I'm speechless.
Let me try to take the other side. Let me try to be a corporate shill for a minute, if
Please
I may.
do.
So, okay. So let's say that, I represent Johnson & Johnson, which I don't in real life. I'm emphasizing for clarity here. This is just for instructional purposes. Couldn't we say, Dr. Bloom, that our drug is perfectly safe, as the FDA has made clear? It needs to be taken in prescribed doses under the supervision of a healthcare provider. So it's not our fault that people are taking excessive amounts of Tylenol. Nonetheless, we have the expertise as a pharmaceutical company to address this issue of liver failure. So, as you just said, there's some value in the work we do. It's not like we're Coca-Cola and we're coming up with a new drug for diabetes, right? There is a legitimate use for Tylenol. It's just that people have abused it, and now we're trying to address that.
Well, let me stop you right there. Aside from kids' fevers, there's virtually no use for Tylenol that I've found, and I searched the literature up and down. It barely does anything for any kind of pain. One use that seems to be legitimate is combining it with an NSAID like Advil, and both of them together seem to work better than either alone. So that's a legitimate use. And as I said, reducing kids' fevers. In terms of pain, there's virtually nothing that it treats. The one example I gave is it was studied versus placebo for headaches. And the study found that there was a 59% reduction in headaches after 2 hours. Okay, I don't want my headache to last 2 hours. But that aside, in the same study, that 49% of the people that got placebo, their headaches went away in 2 hours. So basically, Tylenol works for 10% of the people that have headaches. And for kids' fever, and in combination with NSAIDs, which some people can't take. That's not very useful, I don't think, right?
Not
So,
particularly.
no. But meanwhile, they've been pushing it forever and it sells like crazy. And doctors and hospitals are throwing it at people now because they have no choice. They can't give them an opioid because they get on a list. Post-surgically, you can't give them an NSAID because it screws up blood clotting. So it's just a way of getting them out of the office and the hospital with something that maybe the patient thinks will be effective. But of course, for severe pain, it does zero. So Johnson and Johnson is not blameless in this. They're selling a drug which is marginally effective at best and has a very low therapeutic index, which is the ratio of the useful dose to the toxic dose, and very low. And whenever drugs have a low therapeutic index, that's a red flag right there. So, I guess I could say I admire J&J for working on this, but they were not innocent in the results and the side effects and the hospitalizations and poisonings and deaths that came out of Tylenol over the last 75 years, because it's advertised like crazy. You'd think it was a miracle drug if you saw the ads on TV or in magazines. So I think on some level they know they're selling something that is very imperfect. So there's an ethical thing here. It's anytime you can repair liver damage, which is 0 times really, that would be a valuable tool to have. So good for them for trying it. But it's one company, but the companies are broken into multiple parts, and what's being done with the liver failure is early on discovery research, and it's in mice, and it seems to repair mice damaged livers. On the other hand, you've got the sales department of McNeil, which is a subsidiary of J&J, who want to sell a lot of Tylenol, and these two groups have nothing to do with each other. And this is typical in drug companies.
Your comments remind me of an episode of the show Scrubs from years back, where there's this intern and he's being trained, and he's considering giving his patient Tylenol. So he pages his resident, and the resident says, "Did you just page me to give somebody Tylenol?" And the intern's about to explain all these technical reasons why he was concerned. And the resident goes, "It's regular strength Tylenol. Open her mouth, throw a handful of pills at her, and whatever sticks, that's the right dose." So now, obviously, for the reasons you've just explained, that's not correct. But I think it does sort of helpfully illustrate that even within the medical community, for a joke like that to have any relevance, there has to be some understanding among physicians that Tylenol does not do all that much. So I found that amusing. I just wanted to mention that in passing. If you have any thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them. But there's a couple of the things in the article I wanted to talk about.
Right, just quickly on that, you'd be astounded at how many physicians, many of them I know firsthand, either as a patient or a colleague or a friend, have no idea that Tylenol is worthless. So I just hand them some of the op-eds I've published, and their jaws hanging open. They have no idea. So I think there's a lot of ignorance about Tylenol in the medical community, a disturbing amount. Okay, next question, please.
Yeah, that's insightful though. And I was going to mention this is why ACSH can be so helpful is because of material like this. Physicians are very smart, but they're busy taking care of their patients. They probably don't have an inordinate amount of time to just go look through the peer-reviewed literature on Tylenol,
Right.
So
and guess what? You know how many other people and groups are writing about this? Zero.
Right.
It's just me. Little old stupid me.
Little old stupid Dr. Bloom with his PhD in chemistry. Okay. So this drug that we're talking about, for now, it's got the very sexy title. It's JNJ-263-66821. Could you imagine that on a pharmaceutical commercial? Ask your doctor if 263-66821 is right for you.
Yeah, it'll come up with, if it's ever approved,
Right.
It'll come up with like Vivinude or Nuvavide or Vivivive. I mean, the names, don't even get me started on the names lately.
Yeah. It's sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead, please.
Okay, so it's just, and this is a funny way to present this because there's been so many different conditions. So thrombocytopenia, which is low blood platelet count, it's been posited, at least in one study in Nature, as a treatment for high-dose radiation exposure following a nuclear blast.
Yeah, that's comforting.
Right, yeah.
There's going to be an infrastructure just pouring it into people's arms after half the United States is like smoldering. So forgive me if I'm not impressed with that one.
But still, you could see the pharmaceutical ad, right? It's a woman happily walking down a path in a park and there's a big mushroom cloud behind her.
Oh my.
I was afraid my liver was going to crap out, but then I found Cluhexidine.
I think I have another article. Thank you. That is brilliant.
I'm here to serve, Dr. Bloom. I'm here to serve.
And you serve well, indeed.
Very good. Okay, well, just in closing here, I think there's a couple things. The first is that it's interesting that there are pharmaceutical companies doing this kind of basic research, which is kind of cool. I mean, obviously.
And useful.
If there's a nuclear bomb dropped somewhere, the world's going to be in a really sordid state. Nonetheless, there's really interesting science going on. And even if we are somewhat critical of the fact that they're trying to treat a condition that their drug contributes to, this is important to have this kind of work going on. And then it's just good for you to be aware of it out there as a listener and as a reader of ACSH, because as Josh very eloquently put it, no one's doing this, So you need to be aware, because that's how, and if I can put on my my advocate hat for a second, this is how we change things. Is it starts with people reading stuff and going, well, that's just outrageous. That can't stand, and then potentially you can change things. At least that's my hope. I'm trying to counteract my cynicism, Josh.
Well, I think if you total up the number of readers on my Tylenol articles, probably approaching 1 million. So people are reading it. Some of them are, some of them have a couple 100,000 readers for a single article. So it's definitely being read. Whether it's making an impact in the medical community, that's a different story. I don't think so, at least not yet.
Well, I'll cross my fingers, because you never know who reads it. The senators and congressmen and politicians and public health officials, they all read. They use the internet. Well, most of them read. Some of them are.
Well,
I think about the FDA.
Right. Well, I think the politicians that are in jail, which is like 50% of them, have a lot of time to read. So maybe they're going to read my stuff in jail. And while we're on the topic, here's an idea for you, just so I can be at least somewhat inappropriate, because I've been pretty well behaved for this damn thing.
You have. I've been impressed.
I think there should be a law in New Jersey, and I'm sorry if I offend New Jersey people, but it's not the first time that's happened, that all people running for public office should be imprisoned just to save the time and the cost of putting them there after they get into public office. I think it's brilliant.
I love it. I, as a resident of California and not a fan of my overlords out here, I like it. I think we need that in California too.
I think so.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for us. Read these articles again, just so you're aware. The first one's called Making Vicodin and Percocet Safer by Reducing the Dose of Tylenol. And the second one is A Bit of Irony, J&J developing drug to undo liver damage from its own Tylenol. If you want to get the stories we talk about on the show, go to acsh.org, click the subscribe button on top, punch your email address in there, and then 3 times a week we send you the stories we publish. The ones you read are the ones we talk about on the show. And as Josh just very humbly mentioned, his stories are very widely read when we talk about painkillers and Tylenol and the goofy opioid policy that for some reason persists in this great country of ours. So with that, we're all done. Follow Josh. He is on Twitter. He has a very, very terrific handle of at Josh Bloom ACSH. He's a creator.
Yes,
on top of the science.
That was, it took a focus group to come up with that.
I hope you paid him a lot of money because that's a slamming handle. Okay. And then follow me as well. I'm at CamJEnglish. I'm back on Twitter after an extended hiatus. If you have questions about the show or you want to suggest a topic or you just want to make fun of us, we're happy to oblige. Josh is better at it than you are. I'm just letting you know in advance. But nonetheless, we'd love to hear from you on Twitter. So with that, we are done. We will see you next week for episode 43.